policymakers, and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of The Pulse, live from Bloomberg Tech here in London. Now, industry heavyweights and policymakers are here to discuss everything from AI to the future of defense. Now, first, here are the top stories making the headlines. Sanae Takaichi wins a parliamentary vote to become Japan's prime minister, making her the first woman to clinch the nation's top leadership job. President Trump signs a landmark deal with the Australian Prime Minister to boost America's access to rare earths in an effort to counter China. And we'll bring you a boost and a host of top names from the Bloomberg Tech Summit in London this hour, including the Chief Executive of Pandorabots, Kunze, and the Chief Security and Strategy Officer of Upwind Security, Rinki, Sethi. But first thing is first, let's check on the rally that was, or actually let's check on the stocks. Full stop. Now, the dollar does seem to be advancing against all major peers. Look, if you look at global shares, and I'm looking at the S&P futures, they're pretty much flat. So I guess at 0.1% lower. They seem to be wavering a little bit as investors are weighing trade tensions, but also the impact of upcoming inflation data from the U.S. This will be due on Friday, and of course they'll search for clues on the health of the economy and the Federal Reserve's rate path ahead. Very quickly, let's also get onto the European markets. I think, again, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. We always look at gold, 4,296. If you look at Europe, pretty much, if we have it, look, Europe is pretty much gaining some 0.2% across the board. Now, in just a moment, we'll discuss Japan's first female prime minister and what that means for the country's persistent inflation. We'll also look at how markets are weighing up trade tensions between Beijing and Washington. But first, let's begin here with the Bloomberg Tech Summit taking place in London today. We'll be examining the future of Europe's tech sovereignty, and I'm delighted to be joined by Lynn Doan, Bloomberg's managing editor for cybersecurity and tech. Lynn, so good to speak to you.
So good to see you, Francine.
And we're all wearing sneakers, which I love. I love your world. The tech world is really changing everything left, right, and center. What can you tell us about what you'll be focusing on in terms of cybersecurity and innovation today?
Obviously, the theme of the entire summit is tech sovereignty, and that is the theme of, honestly, the past year in Europe, right? We're talking about sovereignty on AI, sovereignty on the region's entire tech stack, sovereignty in defense technology, and we're super excited about the lineup at the Bloomberg Tech event today because it covers all of that. We have Helsing CEO, arguably the most consequential defense tech company in Europe today. We have Michael Intrater, the CEO of CoreWeave, that embodies the AI data center boom. We have the AI startup Cohere, who is going to speak about how the company is pitching Europe on tech sovereignty and how that's different from the pitch in the United States. So we've got a great lineup that's going to talk about that theme in depth.
Lynn, when you look at cybersecurity and actually just sovereignty in general, I mean, Europe is kind of at the crosshairs because we're very close to Ukraine and therefore Russia. But how is this region doing, given also that they want to spend on defense, especially Germany?
Yes, I mean, the region has to catch up, right? I think that there is a recognition across Europe and in the UK that it's going to take a lot more funding, a lot more investment in innovation and in a homegrown defense, but also defense tech industry in order to build Europe's defenses from the ground up. And as you say, that's not just about national security, that's not just about physical security, that's also about tech security. I mean, if there was anything that established an argument for having your own systems, it was maybe the AWS outage yesterday and the fact that it took down hundreds, if not thousands, of websites around the world. And you see people using that as a business case for wanting things to be local and regional.
But I mean, this was a great example, right? If you look at AWS, right. I mean, is cybersecurity now just making sure that those aren't attacked and are up and running? Or is it more onto, because of AI, some of the cybersecurity stuff just needs to be sexier?
It's all of the above. It is all of the above. I mean, the cybersecurity companies we talk to are very much leaning into AI now, right? Their traditional bread and butter were hackers, cyber attacks, ransomware threats, things like that. But some of the CEOs I've talked to recently say that they believe that in the coming years, AI will pose a larger threat security-wise for companies' data and breaches than your typical ransomware hacker.
Lynn, thank you so much. Lynn Doan there, Bloomberg's managing editor for cybersecurity and tech. She has the coolest title and the coolest job. Now, Sanae Takaichi has become Japan's first female prime minister after winning a key vote. Her rise to the premiership is a historic feat in a country ranking low in female political representation. Well, we're now joined by Geroid Ridi, a Bloomberg opinion columnist in Tokyo. Geroid, what issues are likely to be top of her agenda coming into office?
Well, obviously she has a lot of things that she's going to have to tackle, but the number one thing that I think the public are going to want her to tackle is inflation. Japan not unique in suffering from inflation over the past couple of years, but it is somewhat unique in that it's the only country that was suffering from deflation for so many years and even decades before that. Voters have made their discontent with the situation in terms of inflation known before she does anything, before she moves on to grand economic visions, before she moves on to any kind of major visions that she might want to implement. She's going to have to do something in the near term, and that's because her party, the LDP, is extremely unpopular. It has not been able to do much about the situation under the previous Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba. That's going to be the first thing she has to tackle. After that, she's going to also have to look at discontent or concern, shall I say, around the rising level of immigration in Japan. Very different in terms of absolute numbers to countries in the West, but still the pace of immigration has been on the rise in Japan over recent years. So that's going to be a top of her agenda. And then one other thing I should also say, there's a small matter of the visit from President Donald Trump to Japan next week.
Yeah, so Takaichi also cites Margaret Thatcher as her inspiration, but will her conservative views place her a long way from progressive feminism?
I think that depends on your perspective. Takaichi certainly is no progressive feminist. To the best of my knowledge, she does not describe herself as a feminist at all. At the same time, she herself, obviously, taking this position is a huge step forward. You talked about the gender equality rankings in the intro there. One of the main reasons that Japan is so low in the gender equality rankings is because it's never had a female leader. That will obviously take care of this. She has also moved to try and increase female leadership within the country. Now, on the campaign trail to get the LDP leadership position, she talked about trying to fill the cabinet with Nordic levels of women. She wasn't able to do that. There's actually only 2 other women within the cabinet alongside herself. Having said that, one of them is in the very powerful and very prestigious position of the Minister of Finance. That's the first time also that a woman has ever occupied that office. So don't expect progressive, feminist policies from her. Having said that, she is, I think, supporting advancing women lawmakers, certainly within the country, and that's something to be encouraged.
Geroid, thank you so much. Bloomberg's opinion columnist there, Geroid Ridi in Tokyo. Now we're also joined by Vasiliki Pachatouridi, head of EMEA iShares fixed income product strategy at BlackRock. Thank you for joining us. There's so much going on, Vasiliki. Of course, on the markets, we had credit worries and we have that inflation data. What do you think is driving the markets today?
Yeah, good morning, Francine. Thank you for having me. I mean, if we take a step back, it's been an extraordinary year. We've had equity markets and credit markets being very resilient despite all the macro and the geopolitics. At the same time, yes, there is some nervousness in the system. We're seeing traditional hedges like gold soaring at the same time, but also demand for fixed income this year has been exceptionally strong. Bond ETFs crossed 3 trillion in assets under management, and that has been driven by this relentless demand for high quality income. So really where I sit from, I mean, we are entering this unprecedented stage where both risk assets and haven assets are driving portfolio allocations at the moment.
But Vasiliki, are you surprised that actually, even if you look at equities, I know there was a little bit of a bump because of credit. I don't know whether you're expecting something uglier to happen there. But are you surprised that despite a lot of the macro uncertainty, equities are fine?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the drivers for the equity market, and again, it's primarily driven by U.S. equity markets, the earnings season that has been very strong, and obviously the AI theme, everything that you're hearing today over at your conference. But something that hasn't happened, given the strength of the U.S. equity market, is diversification, and particularly diversification away from U.S. assets and the stronger dollar. But remember, we're sitting here in Europe. Most investors are euro-denominated investors, and this diversification away from U.S. is something that I have seen happening within the fixed income market. So you can diversify your fixed income portfolio looking at European credit, but also other types of credit exposures, particularly within securitized, which gives you a completely different profile. Again, if people are worried about being maxed out in their allocations on IG credit, we think fundamentals are strong, but they can still get diversified income from assets such as securitized, CLOs, CMBSs. These are assets that they're not linked to corporate issuers, they're linked to consumer and other securitized assets. So there's still plenty of opportunities to anchor your fixed income portfolio based on high quality yields, but also gain some benefits from diversifying across regions and different issuer and security types.
Vasiliki, given the steepening yield curves, certainly in Europe, and we've seen a little bit of rumbling in France, are there any, again, countries that look more attractive? How do you play that space?
May I say first that the steepening yield curves that we've seen globally in Europe and in the US, but particularly in Europe, have been a major catalyst for investors putting cash to work. It's been the reason why we've seen fixed maturity strategies such as I-bonds, ETFs, things that they mature like a bond, essentially, gaining extreme traction this year because people, again, we talked about the demand for yield, but also people want stable income solutions given some of the volatility that you alluded to in the bond markets. So if there is more demand for more scope for steepening curves later on from where we stand, potentially we have seen the curve steepening kind of, moderating itself. Obviously, the ECB is where it should be when it comes to the rate decisions. The longer end, obviously, driven more by fiscal challenges. And of course, in Europe, yes, we do have divergence of growth outlooks across northern and southern countries. So yes, potentially there will be some further movements. But again, when it comes to what does it mean for fixed income portfolios, I see that steepening of the yield curve driving assets out of cash into the bond markets.
Vasiliki, do you see a rotation away from U.S. assets? I know some, big hedge funds, for example, point to the rise in gold. Is that now a de-dollarization play, or do you see moves elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, it's something that we haven't seen happening within equity portfolios, and rightly so. I mean, it's hard to ignore the structural tailwinds of the U.S. growth, the economy, the AI boom. But it is something that we see investors intentionally trying to diversify their portfolio in other parts. Gold could be one. As I mentioned, the demand that I see for European fixed income is another kind of manifestation of that. And let's not forget, hedging costs have become a lot more expensive. So if you're sitting here in Europe, it really doesn't make sense to take the dollar risk, hedge it back to Europe. On the other side, I see investors in the US potentially, buying European fixed income assets, hedging them back into dollar, and still getting yields higher than US IG credit. So FX can be a source of income if used correctly.
Vasiliki, overall, when you look at some of the moves that we've seen, I mean, is there any worry about liquidity or anything like that could come to the surface?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, liquidity is not something that we see as a major risk in either the credit markets or in the government bond space. We do see more kind of credit events that could be migration of credit ratings, like IG issuers going into high yield, or corporate actions. But I think that's highlights the need of kind of good credit selection and active management in portfolios. And I think it's also one of the reasons why we've seen, again, continuous growth into ETFs, the industry, both on the index side and on the active side. But when it comes to navigating those more idiosyncratic credit events, I wouldn't underestimate the need for good credit research and analysts kind of analyzing what's driving companies' fundamentals and activities.
Vasiliki, thanks so much for joining us. Vasiliki Pachatouridi, their head of the EMEA iShares fixed income strategy at BlackRock. Now, coming up, we discuss the role of chatbots for businesses with Kunze, the Chief Executive Officer of Pandorabots, an ICONIQ co-founder. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
So we've been doing AI since 2012. So people think it's like a new thing. Gen AI is kind of new, but not all of AI. We have 2,000 people doing it. Spend $2 billion a year on it. It affects everything: risk, fraud, marketing, idea generation, customer service, and it's kind of the tip of the iceberg. And so we're deploying it. Every time we meet as a business, we ask, what are you doing in AI? What are you doing to serve your people? Why can you do better? What is somebody else doing? So we're freely deploying it, and safely.
Well, that was Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan Chase chairman and, of course, chief executive, speaking to Bloomberg recently about the lender's use of AI. Now, with OpenAI set to offer chatbot romance and more adult content to try and monetize its user base, big questions being asked about how society uses technology. Well, my next guest says her AI company will not offer romantic companions. Kunze is Chief Executive Officer of Pandorabots, which makes chatbots for a range of activities, including customer services. She's also the co-founder of ICONIQ, which focuses on consumer AI. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I mean, I guess it's a tricky moment in history where if you're in your business and your space and your industry, you decide how you monetize it. And so you've been very clear, this won't be romantic, companionships. It's for business use.
Yeah, well, so our chatbot technology actually inspired the Spike Jonze movie Her, and we've been in the business for 2 decades. And so we've seen from processing 100 billion interactions an overwhelming user demand for romantic use cases. And we believe that sexualized AI romantic companions are going to be a net negative for society, and also are not the best business choice in terms of working with blue chip brands.
So how do you see actually these chatbots evolving?
We still think that AI companion technology has wonderful opportunities in any sector where personalized listening and helping people feel heard and tutoring and anything that requires a conversation with a human expert, there's tremendous capability. But we think that sexualized use cases are really going to have a negative impact on our mental health, our interpersonal relationships, far beyond what we've seen with pornography and social media.
So, Lauren, when you look at the industries that, where the innovation will really come from, you mentioned education. Is there anything else that you think will really change because of the use of this technology?
Yeah, I think it really is akin to the internet. It is going to be everywhere, and it's going to have as big of a seismic shift. I'm really bullish on educational use cases. I think AI for writing code is already transformative. The problem with generative AI, as everyone knows by now, is there's a big accuracy problem. And so any use cases where you have to be 100% accurate to be safe, there's going to be a problem. But I think the technology is evolving, and we will get there.
Lauren, is there a way, like a utopia almost, where you see actually we'll be able to get, accurate information, unbiased information in everything, and how far away is that?
That's a tough question. I think a lot of people feel that generative AI is hitting a wall with regard to simply throwing more compute and more data at the problem, not yielding breakthroughs. We combine more of a rule-based approach to AI on top of generative systems, and we work with human experts to train any model that requires expertise in a specific domain. So I think that a blended approach is what's necessary for battle-tested enterprise applications that are going to be interacting with consumers at scale today.
So what have you learned? I mean, what surprised you the most, right, in the last 5 to 10 years? It's just
honestly, OpenAI's shift to erotica is deeply shocking. I feel like it's sort of, if you recall when Google dropped "Don't be evil" as their tagline, we sort of went from nonprofit making AI for the benefit of humanity to for-profit making AI for the benefit of humanity to now we're making porn. And it's understandable because there's a 40x gap between their valuation and the revenue, which they have to bridge somehow, but I never really thought we would see in our lifetime. And I think we had many decision points over the last 2 decades looking at the demand for this use case and deciding not to do it. And I think what shocked us is the conversation logs. We saw the most engaged users were people who were coming back to enact the same rape and murder fantasies over and over and over again. And it didn't seem like the AI was going to be able to better socialize antisocial people. It seemed like it was going to help fan the flames of those fantasies. And then the other shocking thing is that the most engaged users are children or young teens. I think that's who gets really into the technology, is really curious, and so it is in fact very dangerous.
So, I mean, is it regulation that could help, or is it just a
I mean, regulation is slow, so I think the real responsibility lies in the hands of the creators, and I hope more people decide not to do this. But I do think we would need regulation akin to products we see that are dependency forming, like tobacco and gambling. I think that media is the wrong analogy. I think we also need warning labels. I think the Surgeon General has proposed that for social media. Something that goes beyond sort of the current cheeky disclaimer, AI can make mistakes, or everything I say is made up. And I think we need a new framework for liability. So holding creators responsible to prove their products are safe rather than consumers needing to show that they were harmed after the fact. Because I think one thing when we say, oh, let's just let adults be adults, and the mental health impact is only on people who are already unstable, that is simply not true. Ever since chatbots were invented in the 1960s, the early phenomenon proved that intelligent, grounded people are highly susceptible to being manipulated just by being agreed with, to being radicalized. So I think it's an everyone problem and not sort of a fringe, people who are already unstable are going to do what they want, but we've solved that. And it's okay to test on the rest of humanity, right? Because we have 1 billion people on the planet using this technology now.
So eloquently put. Lauren, is there a worry that actually it's because people just need to monetize? So I hear a lot of conversation with CEOs, in general, not even the tech space, saying I'm spending so much on innovation, I need at some point to really see a return.
Yeah, that is the most logical explanation, right? OpenAI started out with a very firm stance. We're not going to allow pornographic use cases. They have a history of kicking developers like Replica, the AI companion app that's been fined a lot, that I think famously encouraged someone to try to assassinate the Queen here. They've turned that off in the past and said you can't use our APIs. So this is a big shift. And 30% of all user inputs to chatbots, it doesn't matter if it's a general assistant or something that's sort of designed to be alluring by design, are romantic or sexual. So it's a user demand, and that's where the money is.
Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today. Laura Kunze there, the Chief Executive Officer of Pandorabots and co-founder of ICONIQ. Coming up, as data security becomes increasingly important, we speak to Upwind Security's Rinki Sethi about how to be protected in a digital world. More on that conversation next, and this is Bloomberg. good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of The Pulse from Bloomberg Tech in London. I'm Francine Lacqua, and these are your top stories. Sanae Takaichi wins a parliamentary vote to become Japan's prime minister, making her the first woman to clinch the nation's top leadership job. President Trump signs a landmark deal with the Australian prime minister to boost America's access to rare earths in an effort to counter China. And Bloomberg understands that the Bank of England is considering stress tests for private credit, underlining rising concerns that the sector could be harboring systemic threats to financial stability. So President Trump has signed a landmark pact with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to boost America's access to rare earths and other critical minerals. It's part of U.S. efforts to counter China's tight grip on the supply chains of key metals. Well, joining us now is Martin Rinki, who leads our metals and mining coverage in Shanghai. Martin, thank you for joining us. So what do we actually know about this minerals agreement?
It's another big day for rare earths. The US and Australia agree a pretty sweeping deal, actually, to jointly invest in production facilities, mines, processing of critical minerals, including rare earths in Australia. The first tranche is $2 billion. That's $1 billion each that will go to projects in Australia over the next 6 months. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese talked about $8.5 billion of cash perhaps in the pipeline. Very important timing, obviously. Trump is going to meet President Xi, probably. We'll see at the end of this month, where rare earths is a key topic. Trump is obviously pitching this as his sort of effort to get more supply from outside of China. At the meeting in the White House with Albanese, he talked about the US being pretty flush with rare earths a year from now. These projects do, however, take quite a long time to develop, and all the associated supply chain up to the finished products takes longer. So it's not a quick fix, but it shows that the US is forming a fairly distinct policy now on critical minerals jointly with other countries and not going it alone.
So, Martin, given the vast natural resources of China, can Australia actually fill that gap in the market?
It's a good question. So one of the sort of decisive features of the rare earth spat this year has been that China has focused on supplies of particular types of rare earths. So without going into too much detail, particular types that are really needed in high performance applications in multiple industries, electric vehicles, cars, fighter jets, defense equipment. And those particular rare earths are the ones that are in really short supply. Other types are really not. So what this deal should probably focus on is how the US can get the heavy rare earths, the ones that are in short supply, from Australia. China has this great advantage in that it gets most of its heavy rare earths from Myanmar. It's one of the great sort of factors that support China. So you've got this situation where the US is kind of scrambling, picking up pockets of heavy rare earths from all around the world, while China has this kind of very substantial chunk of supply on its doorstep in Myanmar.
Martin, thank you so much. So interesting. I know we'll talk more and more about rare earths. Martin Rinki there. Now, as we keep hearing, technology, of course, is permeating every part of our lives. And we keep hearing about it, but also we just see it. The risk from ransomware attacks has also risen as more of our valuable details live in the digital sphere. We're now joined by Sethi, Chief Security and Strategy Officer at Upwind Security. Rinki, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it's true, we see it, right? We're addicted to our phones. We rely so much more on Google. We had that shortage yesterday that kind of made a lot of people at the standstill. Like, your job just got a hell of a lot more complicated.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is the hot topic of the day, especially with everything we're hearing around AI. And the outage yesterday was huge and affected customers of different companies all around the world.
I mean, is everything just getting much more sophisticated, or as some of these, cybersecurity threats are getting more sophisticated, it's a low-hanging fruit that we forget about?
Yeah, I think the attacks are getting more sophisticated, but also with AI, attackers are able to scale. And I think now enterprises are catching up, leveraging AI to be able to defend as well. And so the complexity is there. But I think with AI, we've got massive opportunity to do security better and at scale as well.
Rinki, I mean, I love cybersecurity because it's the kind of thing that you don't have to think about until you have a problem, which is why your space is so interesting. If you look at the overall landscape, like who's getting it right, who's investing enough, is it region by region, or is it really companies that then kind of dominate the global stage?
I think it's right now, cybersecurity is such an interesting space. You hear about, I think some of the top investments are happening in cybersecurity all around the world. I know I come from the Silicon Valley, which is becoming kind of, in San Francisco, is becoming an AI hub. Every security company right now is an AI company. Investments are happening all around the world because, we've got to invest in this. You see, like in every area of cyber, there's dozens and dozens of competitors that are being invested in because this is going to be a need for the market.
So can AI also help in actually tracking them? Again, how much of, is AI a worry for cybersecurity, and how much of it is it an asset if used right?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge that we've got to think about because the attackers have AI in their hands, but it's also an equalizer too, right? When you think about it, because now as practitioners, we have AI to drive productivity and to be able to scale. We know that, like right now, that we don't have enough talent to fill the gaps that we have in the market, and AI is going to help us get there.
So what are the tools needed?
I think one of the biggest things to think about is like right now there's a whole shift, and you hear about the largest companies in the world talking about this in their earnings reports even, that everything's going to be focused on runtime security, where we've been focused on kind of where cloud security posture needs to be fixed and where configuration issues might be. Really, like, this is kind of the philosophy and why I joined Upwind Security, which is around you really need to focus at runtime, and what that means is as applications are running, that's where the attacks are happening, and you want to be able to prevent the attackers from even going and hacking your systems. Looking at configurations is important, but that's after the fact. You've got to be where the attacks are happening, and so the future of cybersecurity is all going to be at runtime, and you can't do security right if you're not at runtime.
Rinki, I mean, one of the most fascinating conversations I had was with actually a big Wall Street titan who was saying, their systems at banks sometimes prevents attacks on central bankers because they see it first. I mean, we don't often talk about, again, this crossover of like cybersecurity. Will that increase as AI attacks could come from all sides?
I think so. I think the information sharing has to happen, and you've heard about these like information sharing in the finance industry or in the tech industry that exists. There is information sharing happening, but we've got to get better at it. Like, we've been talking about this for decades, that the attackers are talking and they like share information. So we actually have to do that better as an industry. And I think that there is a lot of that information sharing that does happen.
Rinki, how's Silicon Valley? So you mentioned the fact, of course we know that it's the AI hub, but also there's a lot more investment. Is the money being deployed in the right places on cybersecurity? And are there enough VC funds in that space? Is like Silicon Valley going to be the hotspot for cybersecurity?
I think Silicon Valley is definitely, like, right now it's booming with AI, and I do think there's so many investments happening in cybersecurity. I'm actually really excited about, and being an investor myself, investing in the cybersecurity space. I think it is happening in all the domains right now, and people are taking bets because they know there's going to be some big winners, and even the ones that are smaller companies, they're going to help the larger companies get better at what they're doing in terms of just the capabilities that might be missing today.
So what are you hearing that's quite exciting in the Valley?
To me, I think runtime security is really interesting. Security operations, we know that kind of the ways that we've been doing things are not going to scale. So really doubling down in that. It's exciting to see every company being an AI company. And I don't know, some people think that it's kind of sci-fi, but I do believe the future is agentic. And we are going to rely on agents, maybe with human in the loop to begin with. But in the future, agents will be making decisions for us. And I think if you believe in that future, the investments are really exciting right now, because you're really seeing how these companies will help you scale in the future.
I mean, I think that, the big companies invest quite a lot of money or speak to the experts, and they really want to make sure that their systems are locked down. For the smaller companies, they really worry about being vulnerable. So is there any advice, like if you're a smaller company that's worried about it, but again, your budget is not infinite, like what's the right way to think about security?
Yeah, I think you need to figure out where your top priorities are as a company, but like go and find companies that are really going to help you secure at a lower cost. And there's a lot of companies that are focusing on that can be a true partner for you and help you figure out what your strategy for cyber is. And you're absolutely right that smaller companies struggle. They don't have the big budget and revenues to focus. And so like really finding those key partners. And there's so many cybersecurity companies that can help now.
Yeah, and sometimes it's also like we had some data breaches in the UK, and it could be as easy as something like phishing, right? Something that is so basic. Does that, as attacks get more sophisticated, are there some vulnerable, is it the retailers that you think are more vulnerable, or are there industries that are just more vulnerable because of the nature of what they do?
I think like we always hear that people are kind of the weakest link. I actually think people are our biggest asset. We need to empower them. We need to put the right tech in place, and we need to empower them on how they prevent falling victim to these attacks. Phishing still is, one of the biggest attack vectors, but we could say it's getting more sophisticated, but they were already sophisticated. Now with AI, you can scale it and get them to look like almost like a real email or social engineering attack. And so I do think that we've got to empower our employees and empower our users with the right information. I do worry about kids and the elderly in our communities and making sure that they have what they need and that enterprises are taking accountability to protect them.
Rinki, I mean, if you look at state-sponsored, of course, attacks and cyber attacks, are those the more complicated ones?
Yeah, the nation-state attacks are definitely they have the patience to wait in your environments, right? They're not in a rush, and so they will gain context over time, and so they are very complex. They're hard to detect, but again, with the right partners, they'll help you detect that right from the get-go if you build that in by default in your environment.
What did you learn at Twitter? That I don't know if there's a best piece of advice for everyone out there who is trying to think about things differently.
Yeah, working at Twitter was a really interesting experience. I joined right after the very public security breach there. But what I've learned at working kind of across public and private companies is that the principles are the same around cybersecurity. You're focused on building in really, you want to secure, you want to trust but verify, and that concept is what you want to build security on, regardless of the industry or the company that you're at.
And that, is it when you onboard employees that you need to make that message very clear, or we are much more aware of security in our daily lives compared to 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think that has to be baked in right from everything you do. It has to be within the culture of a company. That security's got to be baked into the DNA. That starts, of course, with tech. You've got to train your people in the right way. I think not just train them when you think they need to be trained in a lot of the checkbox training we see, but really now with AI, you can do in the moment, very customized training such that employees are learning as they about to make mistakes. And so I think that's really important. And of course, your processes need to constantly improve at companies. You need to be evaluating the security posture continuously.
Rinki, thanks so much for joining us. Rinki Sethi there, Chief Security and Strategy Officer at Upwind Security. Now, the first discussion is underway from Bloomberg Tech London. On the panel, Mistral's AI Vice President for Global Public Affairs, the UK Minister for AI and Online Safety, and Bloomberg's team leader for tech in EMEA. The panel, Europe's path to technological sovereignty, and looks, of course, at control over critical tech and how that can reduce dependencies, drive innovation, but also protect democratic values in an era of global competition. So I think we'll listen in a little bit. You can also look at it on LiveGo. The Mistral Vice President saying that Europe, UK need to move with bigger agency on AI. The Mistral VP also saying that e-regulation is so painful to navigate. Now, you can continue watching that, of course, on all of our Bloomberg Tech London or T-Live on your Bloomberg terminal. Coming up, we talk credit. There's a lot going on in the markets. Equities continuing to rally. We discuss whether investors should be prepared for a market correction. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome Welcome back, everyone. A special edition of The Pulse from Bloomberg Tech Summit here in London. Now, the event looking at all the major trends across the sector, from AI and infrastructure spending to cyber security. I am delighted to be joined now by Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor of Technology, Tom Giles. Tom, you're a busy man. I mean, you do it all. It's like technology, it's like AI, infrastructure, entertainment. So let's talk about the money. There's so much money being piled into AI infrastructure.
Hundreds of billions of dollars.
Good or
and there's
bad?
a new announcement every day. Well, clearly what that is showing you is that there's absolutely demand for the infrastructure that's needed, the computing power, the chips, the data centers that are needed to fuel the AI revolution. That's not without question. In my mind, I worry about whether there's overcapacity. I worry about whether we are investing so much in the chips and the infrastructure, but are there going to be enough uses, practical applications for all these AI services that we're investing so much in? And more importantly, will these companies make money off of it?
But Tom, I mean, the money question is a great question, but is it also a timeline problem that actually they may make money, or are we going to adopt AI as fast as we think we are?
Right. And the answer seems to be we're adopting it very, very quickly. What I don't get is whether we're monetizing it as quickly. People are trying it out. They're dabbling in it, right? They're using free services. But how much are you going to pay for generative AI?
Talk to me about robots, chatbots, and actually everything that comes in between. Again, how does it change the way we work?
Oh my gosh, in every way possible. There are, especially, let's think about coding, right? The generative AI is absolutely transforming the way coders are getting their jobs done. It's making them more efficient. It's making them more productive. The question that we're struggling with, and a lot of AI companies are struggling with, is it going to put people out of jobs, or is it going to free them up to a higher order of work?
But also, how do they connect with each other, right? As long, I mean, you need an ecosystem. It's no good having a chat box here and something else over there.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing is that a lot of people are starting to develop relationships with artificial intelligence, and they're making friends, and they're finding romantic partners. And sometimes they're becoming overly dependent, emotionally speaking, on these types of services.
Tom, how's regulation here in Europe? I know there's a lot of frustration that it's over-regulated, but at the same time, Europe wants to be its own, like not really rely on outside sources.
Absolutely. One of the themes of the day is tech sovereignty, and can this region develop its own infrastructure, develop its own ecosystem to keep it from being overly dependent on the US, on China, for example. I'm optimistic on the regulation side. I think that regulators here are starting to get the message that they need to bring a more rational regime. They need to think about things much more pragmatically.
Talk to me about AWS. So there was a massive outage yesterday. You kind of feel very vulnerable because there are only a couple of people in charge of this.
We were all affected, even right here at the conference. Our conference website was affected. So apologies to any of our viewers who tried to learn about it and couldn't. But more importantly, it did show that there's a concentration of technology in the hands of a very small number of really big, powerful players. Most of the time, things go fine, but we're really, when something goes wrong, we see how dependent we've become.
But is there a way around that? I mean, it reminds me, without making too many parallels to rare earths, if you have a concentration on someone, it's fine until it doesn't work out anymore, but is now the time to think about breaking away? Can you even break away?
I think what happens is you're going to have to think about regional clusters. It's not the kind of thing that each individual country, for example, throughout Europe is going to be able to develop its own ecosystem. What you're going to see is groups banding together. You're seeing it happening in the Middle East. We see it in parts of Europe, and I think the message is finally getting across.
What else are you focusing on? I mean, you have many reporters, a big job. This OpenAI pivot towards more sexualized content was a real eye-opener for some. Is there anything else like that in terms of, and this is about making money?
Yeah, I think, are there enough services? Bain put out a research recently that said that in the coming years there is going to be an 800 billion with the B, US dollars, shortfall in terms of the revenue generated from the AI services that we're investing so much in. I'm really eager, I know I keep coming back to this, but I'm really eager to see which companies have found a way to monetize their services. We're seeing it, OpenAI is doing it, Mistral, we're talking to them today. I want to see how they're doing it, Anthropic, and all the rest.
I mean, how much time do they have to really start monetizing? Is there a little bit of a grace period because of technology? No grace period?
No, there's no grace period. I mean, the investments are so high, they're all raising, and these would-be investors are looking at them and saying, okay, what's your strategy? And what's your go-to-market strategy? And you can't just talk about, hey, we just need eyeballs. We just need people to, adopt this and we give it away for free. They're asking that next question is how do you monetize it and bring it into businesses?
Tom, thank you so much. Tom Giles there, Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor for Technology. Now, the Bank of England has begun industry outreach about stress testing the private credit market. The move underlines rising concerns that the sector could be harboring systemic threats to financial stability. Well, for more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Ven Ram. So, Ven, so happy to speak to you. What's going on in terms of private credit concerns?
Morning, Francine. I think that, the private credit concerns are coming to the forefront of investors' minds because, we've got those private credit incidents in the US, namely First World Financial Corp and First Brands going bankrupt, and then Jamie Dimon calling attention to those bankruptcies. So the markets are thinking that, look, there is this opaque corner of the market where, we have got this private credit, which is rarely seen in public eye, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but they are reporting good numbers, good earnings numbers, but what is the kind of volatility that underlies those numbers? That's something no one knows, and there is that opacity, which is why that BOE is concerned about private credit. And in the financial markets, you measure risk in terms of volatility. So if that volatility is understated, that means you're understating the risk, and therefore the returns on the risk may not be commensurate with the risk you're taking, and that is why the BOE seems to be concerned at this point.
Yeah. But Ven, if the BOE is concerned, others should be concerned too. Again, if you're regulating the part which we know about, but not the part that could be opaque, shouldn't everyone be worried about it?
Yeah, absolutely, which is what we saw in the US last week, less of a concern this week because of, investors seem to be focusing on earnings reports, which is okay to brush aside at the moment but if you look at it in the longer term structure of things, it never works out very well to brush aside these things under the carpet. We have seen those private credit concerns come to the foreground. Now, it reminds me of what happened in 2007 when First World Financial Corp reported bankruptcy, and investors kind of glossed over it in April 2007, and they continued glossing over those kind of reports coming out from sporadically from the credit markets, from the subprime credit markets at that point, until October 2007. It was then the markets started really fretting about what the implications were for the bigger financial economy. So I think that, the markets are thinking these are sporadic instances of credit imploding here and there, but I think it's never a good idea to ignore them altogether.
So, Ven, is the rare earths deal between the US and Australia a game changer? I want to ask you that because then we need to talk Japan as well with the new Prime Minister.
Well, I think that to the extent that they have signed the deal, and Australia is one of the bigger rare earth exporters, and therefore that means that it's going to alleviate some of the supply concerns that the US has had vis-a-vis those rare earth minerals, which are vital inputs into smart technology. So I think that to the extent that it allays those fears, it means that the US may be less apprehensive about what China does on that front, and therefore that means it's positive for risk on sentiment. But as I said, markets are getting frothy and valuations are looking very stretched, and therefore I would definitely be concerned about valuations going forward, although this deal does mean that China-US tensions are going to be on the back burner for now.
Okay, Ven, thank you so much. We'll talk about Japan another time, but I know you're writing about Japan. We have great coverage, of course, on all of our MLive products about Japan, the new Prime Minister, and what it means for Japanese assets. That was, of course, Ven Ram. Now we continue our coverage from Bloomberg Tech London with plenty of big conversations still to come, including the chief executives of Pigment, CoreWeave and Helsing. That's on stage, on TV, and on TLive Go on the Bloomberg terminal. Coverage also from the Tech Summit continues right here, and we have live pictures of, the Mistral VP and the minister in charge for AI security speaking to our very own Amy Thompson. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.
And across the regulatory context, because the main thing you can do in that sort of situation is to make sure that we're providing maximal clarity at the earliest possible point and working hand in hand with our firms as well. And I'm delighted, by the way, that Mistral